Well, good morning, Anna Maria Smith. Thanks for coming and joining us. This is Tom Tubon and myself from InnovATEBIO, which is our NSF grant based out of Austin Community College, and we just want to welcome you. Tom and I have the pleasure of orchestrating Goal 3 for this nationwide grant, and we're really looking at workforce issues. And one of the big issues we've seen, Anna Maria, which is very, very important to us, is the change. We're seeing a lot of people retire, and what happens is when they retire, a lot of knowledge goes out the door of the college. And so some of the bioscience programs really need to be mentored into having new leadership. And so what we're going to do is form an institute, and you're our first interview. So we're very, very thrilled to have you. So I have a question for you, if I may, and that is, can you tell us about your background and how you came to Foresight Tech?
I'd be glad to. Thank you, Russ and Tom, for having me. I'm delighted to be your first interview. I had no idea I was the first, but I'm glad to be joining you today. My background is one, I came from industry. I spent more than 25 years in the corporate sector, most of which was in the financial industry. But what I feel very fortunate is that I had a really varied background. I did a lot of merger and acquisition work for a while, did reorganization work, all under the umbrella of human resources, but I was really in more of a project space. And that's where I developed my project management skills, analytical skills, and was fortunate enough to become a leader over time, and really was really fortunate to have talented individuals really committed to the work and serving one another, and ultimately left financial services as they were going through a lot of changes in the past few years because I wanted to stay locally. I had moved here from Pennsylvania years ago and had really become to settle here, and raising our family here was a pleasure and an experience that I didn't want to change for them in the middle of high school. So I decided to stay in the region and shift industries and went to higher ed. And I will tell you that it was not on my radar, but when someone approached me and said, hey, I think you'd really enjoy this, because I also am a person who seeks purpose in the work that I do, and the community college has really provided that for me. And so the transition was relatively easy. The pace is certainly different. I was moving at a very fast pace. I had a national team in my prior role as a leader in the financial services industry, but going local has been different, but it's been a pleasure. I don't miss the traveling all of the time, and certainly I've maintained many of those relationships. But what I love about this current environment also is there's a strong sense of purpose and a commitment to serving the individual student, and hearing the success stories really is motivating, and it's something that I really value. So it's been a great transition for me.
Well, thank you for that. And I just want to introduce my colleague, Tom Tubon, Dr. Tom Tubon from Madison, Wisconsin. Tom.
So, Anna Marie, your experience that you're bringing to the table is absolutely outstanding, and higher ed is fortunate to have you. So, on behalf of higher ed and on behalf of our colleagues and colleges, I cannot imagine the benefit that you're bringing to the world that we work in. So, as an HR professional at the VP level, a talented workforce is your currency. And the question is, what are the emerging trends that are most affecting the 2020 workplace?
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting question, and certainly as HR professionals, we ask ourselves that question all the time, so we stay ahead of it. And coming from industry, I will tell you that we were very client focused, and so I brought that with me. That is certainly something that is in my DNA, where we are very client centric. And I will tell you that that is not changing. You know, we have to be client centric in our work. We have to treat our employees like our clients. And so the one trend that I would tell you that is really resonating with a lot of organization and leaders is this whole idea of employee experience. What is the experience for you as an employee working in this particular environment? Do you feel motivated? Do you feel acknowledged? Do you feel rewarded? Do you feel like this is a place for you where you belong? All of those things are really important. So there's this shift from client being an external focus to really client is inclusively involving and including our own employees. Because this is the reality, just like our clients can shop and go somewhere else, whether it's for an education or for a car, our employees can shop too. So they can stay with us and enjoy and feel the rewards of their work and feel like they are valued and their opinions are heard, or they can shop and go somewhere else. So that is, I think, one of the biggest trends that I wholeheartedly embrace, and one that I think a lot of organizations are becoming to recognize is really important. Because as we prepare to attract and retain the next generation of employees and ultimately leaders, you think about the millennials and the Gen Zs, they want a place where they feel valued and they feel like they are part of the team, and they will leave. And so we really need to be thoughtful about how are we creating the most positive employee experience for the folks who work for us. The second thing that I would tell you also is that, of course, with that, we have this whole notion of flexibility. Of course, the pandemic has positioned us where we're thinking differently about how do we deliver our work. So it's critical that we as leaders are flexible in terms of, yes, we still need to meet the business need, but how can we do that in a different way that doesn't necessarily need to place someone in a brick or mortar location at the organization? Can they do this and provide service delivery from anywhere where they sit? In my old world, it didn't matter where I was, anywhere in the world, I could do my work. And we found that to be pretty prevalent across our organization. Not so much in the higher ed space, of course, because that face-to-face experience is necessary, but there are a lot of functions that we really can do remotely, and we have to be courageous and less risk averse to really think about how we can deliver that differently. So certainly the pandemic has accelerated that move for a lot of organizations, but I think that trend was happening anyway. It's just really put us in high gear around that. And the last thing I would say that is really starting to gain some traction is the notion of this healthy workplace. It goes back to somewhat of the employee experience, but more specifically, are we creating a healthy workplace for our employees? It's no surprise that mental health challenges are on the rise in our country and beyond, but we've got to, as a society, really begin to get comfortable with the notion that, you know, it is okay to talk about the challenges that life brings everyone at some point in their lives. And it's okay to allow someone to bring their life into their work and recognize that they can't always leave that at the door or check it at the door. And so leaders really have to, one, provide the resources and tools necessary for employees to manage mental health challenges as they experience them, and support them along the way. So that's the other trend that I'm seeing, is that organizations are becoming a lot more comfortable with really giving the employees the space and the freedom and the support to be able to balance those things as life just deals them out.
Great
Wow.
perspectives and great share out. I appreciate it. And I'm sure that our participants in our institute will as well. So students as customers and stakeholders, and flexibility, and of course the all important concept of wellness in the workplace. Absolutely important trends, and thank you for the share out. Russ, back to you.
Thanks, Tom. Anna Maria, what is your advice then for anybody who seeks to develop their leadership skills, and in the community college environment, but particularly in the technologies? And you know where we're coming from. We're biotech folks.
I do. I love that. And thank you. I so admire what you do, and we value your contributions so much. So thank you, and keep up the good work, because we're always proud of what you're delivering. The one thing I would say to you, this is a very old concept, but the idea of mentorship is really very valid today. It's been around for a long time, but I think it kind of lost its flair for a while. But there is so much richness in the idea of identifying mentors, and these are not just individuals who are older and wiser than you. Mentorship is lateral as well. as well as hierarchical. So individuals who want to develop their leadership capacities really need to identify individuals who can bring something to the table for them. You know, I do a presentation and it's on image. And one of the things that I talk about is, who is your board of directors? As an individual, you, like any successful company, you should have your own board of directors who surround you and help you succeed in life. And they could be someone, of course, who has perhaps very specific skill sets and advice and knowledge that they bring to the table, such as you might have someone on your board who provides financial experience or relationship coaching or the health and wellness aspect. There's a leadership perhaps component around that as well. All of those individuals in your network or in your life that you can call and say, hey, you know, I'm struggling with this a bit and I'd love your advice. Making sure that you all have that board of directors in those seats as you evolve through your leadership journey is really critical. And just like any board of trustees, those seats empty, vacate, and individuals replace them as you evolve as a professional. So I think that's really important that we keep those networks alive and we cultivate those relationships as we grow as a leader. The other thing that I would say is that from a technology standpoint, obviously it's important to stay abreast of those things. Understanding what's important for your industry, staying abreast of that and keeping those skills up. And also thinking ahead about where you want to be and identifying those individuals who are successful and talking with them. You know, knowledge is power. And we've heard that phrase a lot, but it's so true, is that information helps to inform us and recognizing that there are a lot of different paths for us to get where we want to go. But talking with individuals and identifying what their hurdles were, how did they succeed along their path, but what they would have done differently, and having those conversations and really listening and learning from others to help inform our action plan, our personal action plan, I think is really important.
Wow, I mean, I'm very impressed with the board of directors concept. Here I've been working for how many decades, and I hadn't heard that, but I love it. I really, really love it. I think that's great. And the technology, I think, is becoming very apparent, and especially for us in the techie world. So Tom, I'm going to pass it back over to you.
Yeah, I love what I'm hearing here about the importance of relationships and network and staying current with the technologies, which is a lead into the next question, and that is really, how does a new emerging leader lead in this very unique environment of change?
I think leadership has actually gotten more difficult over time. It's kind of like parenting. You know, you hear people say parenting's gotten harder. Well, leadership has gotten harder. And the reasons why I say that is because there's so much to consider as a leader. Because traditional leadership would be, you provide direction, you oversee, you let individuals, you know, you guide them, and you somewhat of a micromanagement. It was pretty acceptable years ago to make sure that the delivery was on time and of quality. Today, we're working with a very different workforce where individuals want to be able to be in an environment where they are recognized for their talents. And so a couple of things that I think are really important for an emerging leader is to recognize our own vulnerableness in this world. You know, employees do not expect leaders to know everything, but what they do expect leaders to do is to remove all the hurdles that keep them from doing their best work. You know, as leaders, we are charged with identifying the best talent out there to bring to the team. And if we continue to get in their way, or we don't remove the hurdles for them to do their best work, they will leave us. And we're not getting our return on our investment. You know, we bring people in, we pay them for their talents, and then our job is to remove all those roadblocks so they can run fast and hard and love what they do. And that's what I think that the modern leader does. they know when to step back and they know when to step in. And that knowledge, if I were to say one thing that's really important for a modern leader to recognize, is to know when that time is to step back and let your people do their great work and exercise their talents, but also know when to step in. They might be struggling because they need training, or they need a break. They need to unplug for a while. And having that intuition and that relationship with your team to know what they need when. So that's what I think the emerging leader needs to really be comfortable with, is knowing that they don't need to know everything, but they need to have those relationships with their people to know when they need to be a leader and to let their folks go, and when they need to step in and support them when they most need it.
Thank you for that great answer. It really shed a lot of light on how we're approaching problem solving and some of the things that as leaders we need to think about more critically in terms of these relationships and partnerships and working together with our team. I think that's a great segue into Russ's question, which I think is coming up next. And so, Russ, I'm going to pass it back over to you.
So, Anna Maria, you have worked with great leaders. And, if I think back in my career, I can think of several great leaders that I've worked with. Are there any particular traits that you have seen over your experience that just stand out, that these are leadership traits that, first of all, that to you, they stand out? Obviously, to us, we admire them, but, can you put your finger on a couple?
I can. And before I go into that, Russ, one thing I do want to mention, which I think is oftentimes overlooked, is this idea that we only learn from great leaders. And while that's, we learn from great leaders, we also learn from poor leaders. I once had a leader, I had lost respect for, and a lot of the team had, and we were not getting the support and the guidance that we needed. And I was frustrated. I was a younger contributor at the time, and I was frustrated by that. And what I realized was that I was learning as much from her as I was some of the best leaders. And here's why: because I learned what not to do. I learned that some behaviors generated a disengagement, a frustration level. And so I recognized what was transpiring there. And I walked away saying, you know what, this was not a bad experience. This was an experience that I can learn from. So we can learn from poor leaders too. So of course, the best experiences, those are ones where we feel like the leaders that we're working with are motivating and inspiring, and that we want to work really hard for them. And so some of the characteristics that I identify that resonate most is, one, I would start with, is this authenticity. Every one of us, whether we talk about our professional relationships or our personal relationships, don't we value those that are truly authentic, that we know that we're getting the real deal? Now, that doesn't mean that a leader tells you everything they're thinking. That's not what I'm saying, because oftentimes leaders can't do that because they have information that they simply can't share, or there's confidentiality issues, etc. But a leader who is real in terms of their empathy, their care, their professionalism. So every time you interact with that person, it consistently tells you that they are who they bring to the table. They are consistent, and they are sharing with you who they really are. So I think this level of authenticity is important in all leader-employee relationships. The other thing that I would say is that what I feel is really important, and I've tagged it as professional courage. As we all know, leaders make tough decisions, but oftentimes we connect that to things like budget cuts, or eliminating a product suite or something like that. And what I'm talking about here is different, in that while certainly that takes professional courage, those are easier decisions to make because you have data that informs those decisions. when I talk about professional courage as a characteristic of great leaders, it comes in the form of something like this. When you have the professional courage to be able to say, you know what, I made a wrong call there. I didn't consider X, Y, and Z, and I've learned from that, and I want to be vulnerable enough to say that and share that. A professional courage is that kind of person who can do that. The other thing that really resonates for me, and I've been working with leaders for a long time around how do you get people to perform at their very best, is also to have the professional courage to be able to give honest feedback and timely feedback. That is hard for people because the fear paralyzes them. And so they'll ignore it, they'll brush it under the rug, they'll hope it goes away, or they'll pass it on. They'll hope that employee goes somewhere else so someone else can deal with it. And I can tell you from my own experience, and certainly from working with teams and being a leader of others and coaching leaders, is the leaders who have the professional courage to be able to give that feedback, to say, hey, I want to let you know how you showed up in that meeting the other day, and I don't think at all it was intentional, and I also don't think you were aware, but I want to share with you what my observations were. And to be able to have those kinds of conversations with employees to let them know where they are and how they're showing up, and to not be held back. Now, granted, to be built on respect. In order for me to be able to give feedback, I really have to be able to earn the right to give people feedback. And I know, I can speak from my own experience. I can tell you I have a fabulous team. I'm lucky to have them, but I know when I give them feedback, they know it's well intended and I care about them, and I'm giving them constructive feedback because it's what I believe, I'm authentic, and it's to make them the best they can possibly be. Now, also, feedback is not always constructive. Feedback is about having the professional courage to be able to say, you were outstanding in that presentation, and the things that you shared were spot on, and I could tell the audience was so engaged with you, and I want to let you know that. And you really made our department look great. It's constantly giving feedback, so it's not an event. It's really part of what you do and part of the relationship that you have. That characteristic, I think, leads the individual leader to success, but also leads the team to success as well.
Wow, that's Tom.
Tom's on mute.
You're on mute, Tom.
Hey, Tom, you're on mute.
Sorry about that.
There you are. You're back.
I'm rendered speechless, so surprised I was on mute. And that's some of the best advice that I've heard about engaging and some of the characteristics that are really helping to define these great leaders. One of the, I guess, maybe just a follow-up question, because I see this a lot when we talk about leadership and characteristics of leadership. And one question is that there's a fine line between providing feedback that is constructive and feedback that creates a toxic environment for leaders. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering whether or not, how does one in a leadership position generate that self-awareness of when you cross that line? That's a very difficult place to be.
Mm-hmm. And Tom, just to clarify, so how does the leader identify when to share that feedback?
Yeah, exactly. So that it creates an environment of growth and encouragement.
Mm-hmm. I think how one shares that feedback, again, going back to asking oneself the question, do I have a relationship with this person? And hopefully I have invested enough with them. I've asked about what's important to them. What keeps you here? What keeps you working here? What do you value as an employee? Taking the time on the front end of those relationships to ask those questions and do a lot of listening. Oftentimes leaders go into a new group and they automatically feel like they need to tell, they need to direct, they need to tell, they need to inform. And that's actually the opposite. when you go in as with a new team as a leader, or you've been promoted into a leadership capacity, you have to listen and ask questions. And so those questions allow you to build that relationship. So assuming all of that has taken place and you're in a position to give feedback, it's how you frame that feedback. That I know that this XYZ is important to you. I know that your experience in this area is important to you. And I want to share with you. And I also say, don't use but. The word but is kind of remove that from the language, use and. I know this is important to you, and I want to share my observations about what I think is getting in the way for you and what's keeping you from achieving those goals. And having those frequent conversations, not an event. You know, oftentimes leaders would say, I only meet with my people once a year to talk about performance because that's the formal time when I've been asked to do it. Throw that out the window. Performance evaluation should take place every time you meet with your employee. Have your one-on-ones. Ask, how are things going for you? This is what I've noticed. Build a culture of feedback so it's never toxic. So, and sometimes the reality is you're sometimes going to have an employee that is just not the right fit. And our job is to identify the right people for the seats around your table. And sometimes it's not going to work out. And they're not meant to do that work. They're not meant to be in that environment or that culture. And that's okay. But this is what you want, is for them to come to that realization rather than you to come to that realization. And I say the worst situation, of course, is when you really have to terminate someone. But I say you never terminate anyone. They terminate themselves. And that's because you've given them the tools, the feedback, and the resources to succeed. And if they can't because of a lack of skill or a lack of will, then that is their choice. But to separate with that respect and that dignity is really important to keep that person whole.
Anna Maria, I just wanted to, I'm conscious of your time and we're very grateful for all the time that you've given us. I didn't know if you had a minute or two just to respond to one of the statements that you said.
I do.
Great.
Please, let's take this time. This is important.
Great.
Glad
Thank
to do
you.
it.
So Tom, I wanted to pick up with Anna Maria on professional courage. And Anna Maria, I'm interested. I have never really heard the term, but I know exactly what you're saying. You know, you could be in a meeting or you could be with somebody and you might just be holding back, or you might not express yourself because you're thinking, you know, if I say this or I say that, what will happen, etc. You don't know what the downsides or the upsides are of if you don't choose your timing, you know, well. In some environments. In other environments where it's open and people are really, you know, interested in hearing what you have to say, the culture is different. So the culture is very wants that of you. Can that be taught?
That's a really good question too. And you know, some of that is culture is hard to teach, right? So you have to know the culture to know how do you navigate within it. I've worked in cultures, and certainly my prior culture was one that feedback was part of the environment. And it was okay for you in a meeting to say, you know what, I'm really struggling with that idea. Help me understand that because I'm not getting there. And in other environments, and certainly the environment where we're in now, in a higher ed environment, it is less corporate-like. So you really have to be thoughtful about the relationship you have with that person, who else is in the room, etc. But having that awareness of what the culture will tolerate is really important. Now, I think that's hard to teach, but again, going back to mentorships, and you can have peer mentors. When you come into a new environment, identify who those peer mentors are, to be able to ask them, what's tolerated here and what's not as it relates to professional courage. If I don't like an idea, what is acceptable? And hopefully, and that's not to say that you have to immediately conform, but you have to succeed in order to be able to change an environment. You have to be successful. So change is incremental. And so I would say learn the environment and then incrementally change it for the better. because you can do that. You have the power to do that. So I also think a strategy that I have certainly employed is I want to share some feedback with someone, but I know the time is not right. So Russ, as you just said, you have to be thoughtful about knowing the time. The time might not be right, but what I will do on the side is to say to that person, hey, I'd like to talk with you about something I'm feeling, and I want to share some feedback. Would you be willing to have a conversation with me about that? Not in the moment, because the other thing that we have to factor in is who they are. What kind of person are they? Are they a person who likes feedback in the moment? Or are they someone who needs to be more thoughtful about it and they need more preparation? It's all about meeting them where they are. So giving that invitation to say, would you be willing for me to share my thoughts and feedback around this? Can we meet for coffee at your convenience? And that invites them to do that, but it gives them an opportunity to prepare. And then you're in a safe environment where you can share feedback and they can respond as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Tom, over to you.
Well, I, for one, appreciate your sharing of your wisdom and your insights, and want to be respectful of your time, because I know you only budgeted a limited amount of time, and I know I, for one, seriously really appreciate all that I've heard. Russ, I think that this is a wonderful interview, and definitely our discussion with Anna Marie is going to be an incredible highlight for our institute. So thank you very much, Anna Marie.
Thank you for the invitation. Call on me anytime. It's a pleasure.
Anna Marie, I want to thank you again on behalf of the college and also on behalf of our institute and InnovATEBIO. You are truly, in my books, a great leader. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Have a good day.